Good evening and welcome to the 2025 Emerging Voices Fellowship Final Reading. My name is Sabir Sultan, and I am the Director of Literary Programs at PEN America. Along with my colleague TC Mann, Coordinator Literary Programs and Emerging Voices, it has been our pleasure to work with this year's fellows. The Emerging Voices Fellowship provides a 5-month immersive mentorship program for early career writers from communities that have been traditionally underrepresented in the publishing industry. Through curated one-on-one mentorship, introductions to editors, agents, and publishers, and workshops on editing, marketing, and creating a platform, the 5-month fellowship nurtures a creative community, provides a professional skill set, and demystifies the path to publishing, all with the ultimate goal of diversifying the publishing and media industries. Tonight, you will hear readings from this year's cohort of fellows. Selected from across the country, their work explores timeless issues like family, belonging, and legacies of the past, among others. You will also hear from their generous mentors, brilliant writers who will each introduce their mentees this evening. Before we begin, I would like to thank the Jason Mraz Foundation, whose generosity helps make this program possible. We also want to thank the Emerging Voices Alumni Community Advisory Board, PEN America staff, and the 2025 readers, final judges, mentors, workshop instructors, and visiting professionals who all contributed to this year's fellowship. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's show and our incredible fellows. I hope you enjoy tonight's readings.
I am Remica Bingham-Risher, author of 4 books of poetry and a memoir. My most recent book, Room Swept Home, won the LA Times Book Prize in Poetry. I'm so happy to be able to introduce my mentee, Leila Farjami. Leila is an Iranian-American poet based in Los Angeles, a psychotherapist, and a caregiver. The women in her family and beyond figure heavily in her work and her life. And this is my story as well, so we were drawn to each other instantly. Leila isn't a new poet. Instead, she is a meticulous, diligent culture saver and worker. So even as we began planning what this mentorship would look like, how it could be most useful, Leila's work was steadily making its way into the world. She revealed that she had not 1, but 2 manuscripts ready to be submitted for publication and was working on yet another. We'd been together a little over a month when her manuscript, Daughter of Salt, was chosen as an editor's selection by Trio House Press. So her debut collection is forthcoming in July 2026. Her poems Feed and Nurture are snapshots of whirring hands and minds, matriarchs who hunger and feast, birth and become, journey and prepare a table. She's the recipient of the Iowa Review Award in Poetry, the Cincinnati Review Shifts Award in Poetry, and I'm so grateful I've been paired with her for her PEN America's Emerging Voices Fellowship. Her work and love of the word bolster me, and I know her words will open worlds to you as well. Welcome, Leila.
Hello, my name is Leila Farjami, and I'm a PEN America Fellow in Poetry. The first poem I'll read you is titled Bonds and Stars. When I was a child, my fire burned black. What is not seen can never be put out. I never asked, what about me? I pondered the smallness of sparrows, too many found dead or dying in the pond, floating on its algae mirror like roughest pads of lily, gray bibs hanging open, darkening in water, bellies bloated, eyes narrowed and still. Once in the backyard, I dug a hole under the willow, buried too deep in wet earth, packed and shrouded their corpses in white silk, kissed their clenched wings with reverence, muttered a prayer as if sanctifying saints for another life. Then the Tehran winter hit, bone-sawing snow, raising wind chill. The war, the sparrows in my handmade grave, feathers turned to shards of ice. Insides, slush, glassy worms. I never asked, what about them? For 6 years, death was everywhere. I stood under bombs and stars, never looked up, never. Where would they land? Your face or mine? I never asked, what about us? The next poem is titled Origin Story. I learned to breathe underwater, spring vacation 1978. Aunt Nair takes me to the Caspian, where stray herrings die along the sable shore. She lifts her arms in prayer for the bounty we haul home for dinner. Each fish the size of my hand, brine and grit, carcasses cupped in our palms, their dorsal fins like a mermaid's comb. My aunt guts them, their rancid odor, purple intestines bleeding in the sink. She drops them in a boiling pot with salt, garlic, bay leaves, turmeric. They cook for a year or longer. Their spines, centipedes of cartilage, skulls loosened, alabaster relics of the underworld. We grind them with our teeth, grind. Seawater tides in my body, the moon moors, the randomness of where we end up, the certainty of how we vanish inside the other. Months later, the revolution begins. Bodies on Tehran streets press like barnacles on a midnight whale. Men, tinned clowns, their entrails worn inside out. Then come the executions, death anchoring deep in our bellies. All the fish we've ever eaten gape and shut their gills to no air, thrash, chant through the night. We're alive. We're alive.
My name is Cherry Lou Tsai. It's my honor to introduce Emily del Carmen. Emily is a queer Dominican writer born and raised in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, a neighborhood that deeply shapes the landscape of her fiction. Her work is speculative at heart, always asking what history leaves behind and how the personal and the political meet in unexpected, intimate ways. Emily is part of a new generation of writers who are not afraid to imagine boldly while staying rooted in community and place. In her writing, the past doesn't stay still. It moves, it interrupts, it re-emerges in forms that are both haunting and tender. I'm so excited for you to hear from Emily today and to encounter her work that expands what Dominican, queer, and Brooklyn storytelling can look like on the page. Let's welcome Emily.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily del Carmen, and today I'm going to be reading from a short story I wrote called Muñeca. I hope you enjoy. The girls learned to sew in the campos, a task every young Dominican girl knew how to do. But it was Milagros who brought people alive in patterns only a tiny genius like her could think up. She sketched her dreams onto cardboard, boxes, and papelitos found floating in the wind. Dresses that pillowed on the floor to regal hats adorned with ribbons. Word of the child's obsession with creating clothing traveled like the latest bachata hit through the campos of Moca. She had a talent that could take her anywhere. That anywhere for Milagros was the Nueva York of the late 1960s that she saw on her family's black and white television screen, the Nueva York that her sister Susana lived in. She couldn't wait for the day to drape herself in a design of her own with a Made in USA tag. When the notice came that held Milagros' visa, it felt like a prayer had been answered. The whole family gathered around, whispering prayers for the postman who came bearing Milagros' personal visa para un sueño. Milagros arrived at JFK Airport in the middle of January 1970. 3 days later, she was working at Bella Fashion Factory in Soho's garment district. She and Susana trudged through a dreary cold that Milagros had never experienced. Bella Fashion was one of the only places where the sisters, without employment visas, could find work off the books. At the factory entrance, the crowd of workers pulled them apart. Susana would head up towards textiles, and Milagros towards the leather department. Cuando salgas, espérame aquí, Susana called after her. They promised to wait for one another at the exit and disappeared into the crowd of workers. Psst, Dalia hissed on Milagros' first week working. You're paid by the number of belts you finish, not by the silly outfits you show up in. Milagros hadn't been paying attention to the people around her. She'd woken 2 hours earlier, darting back and forth from the bathroom outside in the hallway to the room Susana rented in the tenement apartment building they lived in. Don't pay attention to her. She's just teasing you, the small rubia named Minerva chimed. Chisme travels fast here. I hear you're from Moca. I have a boyfriend there, she replied, glitter in her eyes. I have one in Sosua too, she continued as the woman broke into quiet laughter. My name's Dalia, and I came to America to wrap belts, Dalia joked. Both women looked to be as old as Susana. They dressed like the Americanos on the street and held bright, uncracking smiles. I've been here 3 months. You'll learn quickly with us, Dalia winked. You'll have more time to daydream, chiquita. Together, the trio fell into a rhythm processing the belts. Dalia attached buckles, Milagros clamped on rivets, and Minerva prepared them for packaging. Buckle, clamp, package. Over and over until the women seemed like parts of the machine itself. While on belt duty, Milagros tried hard not to forget what she could do. She believed that the faster she worked, the sooner she could join Susana on the row of sewing machines. But the work in America was relentless. The time on the ticking clock never seemed to change, and because the windows were barred from the piled boxes, the fluorescent lights they worked under blurred day into night during their 12-hour shifts. If one of the women hurt themselves, moving so fast at times that a clamp mistakenly pressed down on a finger, they were expected to work the following day. The time Minerva twisted her hand into one of the machines, her fingers flattened, she was sent home. The next day, she was back at Bella Fashion, her hand miraculously better, as if it had never happened. When the jefe cheated Dalia out of 10 belts, she had stormed off and chopped off all her hair with the same scissors she used for the thread. The next day, she arrived with a blonde bob that looked natural. Rubia como una americana, they'd complimented. To Milagros, she looked like a doll pulled from a box. But there was no time to despair at the factory. They had quotas to finish, money to send back home to Santiago. So no matter how taxing the job got, with little to no breaks, the women kept a permanent smile plastered on their faces. America was a business after all. They could be replaced. For 5 hard months, the women taught Milagros about the factory and about how to survive it. Each morning, they briefed one another on any gossip they could come up with. One morning, about how customs was stealing the packages they sent back to the island. Another, about how Presidente Balaguer, ese viejo ladrón, was trying to steal the election back home. The juiciest pieces of information, of gossip, the bits they whispered under hushed breaths, were about the sucias that were allowed to slack off at the factory and get promotions because they did sneaky things with the jefes. They invented dramatic storylines for these women and looked forward to the next bit of tantalizing information. Until one day, after 5 months of leaning on each other, everything changed. Milagros was bumped up to the textile floor.
I'm Ayşe Papatya Bucak, and I'm thrilled to introduce Pegah Ouji to all of you today. Pegah Ouji is an Iranian and American writer who writes in Farsi and English. Her work has appeared in Epic, Epiphany, Fugue, Necessary Fiction, and other journals. She has been an emerging writer fellow at Smoke Long Quarterly and an editorial fellow at Roots, Wounds, Words. Her writing has received support from a number of organizations, including Kundiman, Grub Street, and the Shipman Agency. Her story, Is It Too Late?, was selected as one of 10 outstanding stories to read in 2024 by Longreads. I know that the roles designated by Penn are mentor and mentee, but really each of my conversations with Pegah has felt like a conversation between writers who have similar interests, worries, ambitions, and questions. And those conversations have been, for me, a reminder of the value of conversation itself, even when those conversations don't lead to firm solutions. It's no surprise that Pegah's fiction, similarly, feels like a conversation in which interests, worries, ambitions, and questions are put through the tumbler of experience, allowing readers to see all the nuances of a life lived between countries. Her stories ask what it means to be of Iran, even when you are not in Iran, and they ask what it means to be in America, even if you are not of America. These are stories about migration rather than immigration, because they remind readers that very few journeys are one-way journeys. These stories recognize that our lives are so often a movement back and forth, where we connect and disconnect from places, from people, from identities. These are not static stories. They are full of movement, both joyful and tragic. Please enjoy listening to Pegah Ouji.
Hello, my name is Pegah Ouji, and I'll be reading from a short story called Untouchables. In northern Tehran, at the turn of the Elahiya neighborhood, the ghost of baby Jamshid kicks the metal vent of his mother, Masuma's bedroom. He lashes the bony banyan branches against the stained glass windows. Starved for his mother's blood, he sucks greedily on her arm, neck, and breast, leaving behind eggplant-colored bruises. Sitting on her vanity table's crooked bench, Masuma Hariri rubs Vaseline on her arms. If only she could understand ghost language, could tease apart the phantom syllables. What does he want from her? The neighborhood kids play hopscotch behind the Hariri mansion's brick walls. When the muazzin's last call to prayer ribbons through Tehran's dusk pollution. The parents call their children inside. The narrow street is riddled with pebbles left behind after hopscotch. Masume is watering the heaving purple basil plant when baby Jamshid's breath sends a phantom ripple, leaving her arm goose-fleshed, tender and volatile. She's seized by a sudden fear. She too might evaporate, become an apparition overnight. When in the dark belly of midnight, her husband Arash snores next to her. And in an instant, she hates the world and senses the world hating her right back. That too is baby Jamshid, scrabbling his small fingers into the hollow cave under her jaw, blocking breath. Can a baby be capable of such venom? Of course, a baby can. A mother knows. Especially the ghost of a baby 7 years in the making. Rounds of fertility treatments. 8 months after his parents' reverse immigration back to their homeland, from LA to Tehran, baby Jamshid quietly announced his presence through 2 pink lines. Over the following weeks, Arash chewed his nail into a jagged rim, the sharp edges scraping the pale skin of Masume's belly. Isn't it too soon to decorate the nursery? He asked. Don't jinx our baby. If only life took the trajectory of imagination. After the bump of her belly hollowed, all the neighbors agreed. It's the most terrible luck. But also privately debated whether this was karma, what you got when you left mighty America for rotten Iran. The parents warned their kids not to play too close to the Hariri mansion or talk to the taffy lady, a nickname they had given Masume. During the first week of their move back, Masume had knocked on all the doors, dishing out bags of saltwater taffies. For weeks, Hariri's arrival had pumped to full production the neighborhood's factory of gossip and imagination. The taffies are piss yellow, but they taste like bananas. My dad says they're kharpul. Even their pillows are stuffed with cash. My grandmother says it is haram for the 2 of them to live in that huge mansion when we are squeezed in a matchbox. The soul's plasma flutters around like stardust trapped in a jar. In the morning, baby Jamshid's ghost becomes dawn dew, spirit condensed. An eerie quiet drips from the mansion's walls. Outside, the neighborhood kids form 2 lines on the sidewalk. Boys, girls, waiting for the school bus. Masume trails down the Kara marble stairs. Arash is already in the kitchen, combing bergamot oil into his eyebrows with an old toothbrush, sneering at the sinister new pimple reflected in the silver samovar on the kitchen counter. Masume had found this habit, taking meticulous care of his abundant hairy harvest, endearing when they first met at UCLA 10 years ago. But time has a way of warping what you once loved and spitting it back at you. Lifting the drape of her robe over her left thigh. She points to another purple bruise, the blurry shape of two tiny lips.
I'm Ashna Ali, the author of The Relativity of Living Well and poetry editor for Epiphany magazine. It has been a joy and a privilege serving as mentor to Varun Shetty, winner of the 2022 F. Sean Hedge Award for Poetry in Medicine, whose poetic work interrogates, by night, the healing of the soul, while by day he strives to heal the human body in his life as a medical doctor. Varun's luminous optimism and work ethic shine through in his dedication to his craft and in his fierce love of the living, even in all of our violence. For the last several months, I've had the honor of being one of the first readers of poems that testify to the beautiful and brutal stakes of our lives as human animals, trying, and often failing, to live with goodness amidst other creatures. His poetry looks deeply at what makes up our connection to each other, to our bodies, to the bodies of animals as companions, as nature, as predators, and as food. He asks these existential questions with characteristic gentleness, exploring multiple contexts of both American and Indian life, and the humanity he bears witness to as a medical professional working in metropolitan hospitals. Varun's is an observant poetry of place that gently probes how history layers upon itself in the spaces that outlast both the narratives we ascribe to them and the scope of our individual lives. At a time when we are daily faced with questions of human hubris, Varun's lyric style invites us back to the humility and right relationship with the earth that we all deserve, without judgment or chiding. His expansive, metaphysical, queer, and South Asian intersectional lens invites any listener or reader into greater generosity of spirit. I introduce him to you with great pride. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Varun Shetty, and I am reading from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm part of the poetry cohort this year. My first poem is called Intimacy. That morning, I tasted coffee from Burundi. I rolled it around on my tongue. It was juicy, like ripe chikus, had a bit of cocoa and a long, lingering finish, the kind of sweetness a song leaves you with. I drank in slurps. Later, while he was held prisoner by the murmuring delirium, I sat beside him, uncovered his chest, and placed the ultrasound probe on his tender, tired ribs. I found the color of his struggling heart, the blues bouncing in all the wrong places. His voice was a soft cough. There wasn't enough air in a day. Just beyond the edge of his world, at lunch, we laughed so hard our sides hurt. We did not choke once. My next poem is called The Vegetarian. In this poem, I go between the pet store, the hospital, and my village. The Vegetarian. At the pet store, I look for a toy that doesn't resemble an animal my dog can actually kill. I exclude the chickens with their high-pitched squawks. The package inserts mention instinct and how sounds of pain can enhance it. I land on a quiet sloth. The nurse shows us videos of her fluffy yellow chickens. We let out little yelps of adoration. Just before she stops the video, she says, "These are my meat chickens. Circle of life, right?" She goes inside to help her patient with his pillow. In my village, they bathe a blue, red-crested rooster with a garden hose. He struts and spreads his wings and has no patience for little things like me. It is the night of the Bhuta Kola dance. As the demigods possess the dancers, they snort like bulls and their chests bounce to the beat of the drums. They never stop moving. My relatives don't hesitate to serve up the rooster for sacrifice. I see his head sitting upright on a newspaper in my uncle's palm. I swear he blinks twice as he sees his headless body dance like the dancers who just beheaded him. A trail of blood glows in the night. The eyes close. It feels like a long time. In the ICU, when it's really busy, a nurse says she's been running around like a headless chicken. I guffaw. The rooster still runs in one last shocked attempt, still flips like the dancers, their bare backs slapping against the concrete patio. Later that night, after the drums ended their assault, we ate Mangalorean chicken curry. In the store that screams of rawhides and bull penises, I pick a sloth that doesn't make a sound. My dog, happy to have received the gift, takes it outside, where he shakes it without knowing why. He sits down and nibbles on the soft, hairless hand. My third poem and final poem for the night is called Capital. We protested, but not enough. Ilya Kaminsky. It is not sexy to embrace capitalism with such vigor, but he does it with an enviable discipline and shares that discipline with me freely so I can rail against this odd system of inequity while not being victim to it. He helps me budget so I can feed my insatiable desire to travel well, all the while railing against capitalism. You've got to play the game, I say. I invest more than I rail against capitalism. How do I balance capitulation with criticism? He doesn't think about that. He was tied up to a pole as a child and beaten. Now he has built walls of money and he is happy. I sip coffee sitting next to him, reading the New York Times, and rail against capitalism. He nods in support. Then we discuss our next vacation. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me.
My name is Swathi Dardala, and I'm the author of several young adult novels, including the Tiger at Midnight trilogy, and most recently, Maya in Multicolor. It is my true pleasure to introduce my mentee, Trini Bui. Over the course of our mentorship, I've been continually struck by her beautiful, lush storytelling, her dedication to her craft, and the deep emotional truths that underpin every sentence she writes. Trini's young adult fantasy novel is inspired by her Vietnamese heritage and beautifully explores the intertwined themes of family, home, duty, and legacy. What makes her voice so compelling is the way she renders those themes as lived, urgent experiences for her characters. Her writing captures that pivotal moment of youth when you are both looking outward toward the vastness of the world and inward at the complicated inheritance of where you come from and your past. Writing for young adults is a special honor because so many young readers do not yet see themselves in the stories handed to them. Trini's work adds to that vital and growing body of literature, offering both a window into experiences and traditions that may feel unfamiliar to some, and a mirror for readers who will recognize themselves and their struggles in her work. Mentoring Trini has been a real joy. Her curiosity, her openness to growth, and her commitment to telling stories that matter have reminded me again and again why young adult literature is so necessary. I'm confident that hers is a voice we will be hearing for years to come. Please join me in welcoming the brilliant Trini Bui.
Hi, my name is Trini Bui. I'm currently based in Fort Worth, Texas, and today I'll be reading from my young adult novel, tentatively titled Dragon Song. Bangop seems to recognize Laum as a waiter approaches to seat us. Her mouth opens. When her eyes land on my face, she clams up. Samhung is a large city, but somehow all our aunties and uncles are connected, drawn together by a history that I have no knowledge of. Plus, my family's presence in the city is notable enough. My parents consult with a number of businesses about how to grow their market, whatever that means. My parents' disappearance has left a few of their clients in a lurch, and there's only so much we could say before the truth came out. Word must have gotten around to Bangaw. I can tell she knows about what happened with my parents, and the implications of it happening during the Hungry Ghost Month. Ever oblivious, Lum waves to Bangaw as the waiter guides us to a table that hasn't been cleared yet. Lum and Zui split up, one on each side of the table. Ha goes for the seat beside Lum before I can get to it. Lum gives me only the briefest look before we gather the used bowls and chopsticks. We set them onto a waiting hovo, and our waiter wipes our table down as the hovo returns the dirty dishes. Look, let's talk about what we're actually here to do, Lum says after the waiter takes our orders. We're supposed to be celebrating Win. Shh. Ha presses her hands into Lum's face, making him sputter and laugh. Keep your voice down, she says. It's the Hungry Ghost Month. If you say her name too loudly, oh, relax. Ghosts aren't going to get us, Lum says. Bangaw has a ton of wards. Lum gestures to the wards that hang on the lamps overhead. They glimmer faintly, soft pillows of incense wafting into the air, indicating that Bangaw and her family have adequately paid homage to their ancestors. Plus, Lum adds, we all have our charms, right? Lum points at the beaded bracelet he wears around his left wrist, the jade so dark it looks black. Ha fidgets with a gold chain bracelet, held together by a circle of jade with an anchor through the center. My brother's jade bobby pin keeps his hair tucked behind his ear. I tilt my head. My jade earrings bump my jaw. I don't know, Ha says. Every day people report seeing ghosts as far as the city center. Not as many people have gone missing this year, but... Ha doesn't meet my eyes, but I know she's hinting at my parents' disappearance. I want her to say it. I let the silence dare her to say it. That my parents' disappearance was the result of ghosts stealing them away from me because I hadn't properly honored my ancestors. We had searched for them after all, only to find nothing. The night before my parents went missing, my grandmother spoke with them about the upcoming Mid-Autumn Festival. Investigations into their businesses indicated no suspicious activity. Searches on their phone revealed no plans to leave everything behind and escape. Given the time of year, the police gave up their search quickly and told us that if any information came forward, they would let us know. Lum taps his finger against the tabletop. Our parents just keep repeating those ghost stories to make sure we don't stay out too late. To which I say, you have no power here, spirit. Zui laughs. Lum upturns the plastic cups drying on the table. Zui grabs napkins, wiping the cups down and passing one to each of us. Lum pours lukewarm golden tea from the table's carafe, saying, a toast to... Lum lowers his voice, leaning over the table. Win, he whispers, with a grin and a wink. He gives me a sly look, the quirk of his brow making my chest tighten. Ha shoves him back into his seat. Welcome home, Lum finishes, raising his cup. It's been a long time coming. Zui taps his cup to ours. Whoa! I pinch Zui's arm, making him draw in a sharp breath between his teeth. Don't cheers, I say, as Zui rubs his injury. You are 16 years old. This is tea. Just trying to live a little, G, Zui says, frowning. Yeah, let us have some fun, Lum says, propping an elbow on the table and cheersing with Zui again. Zui sticks his tongue out at me. All I meant is that you're destined for greater things than tinkering with your bike, Ha says, as though we never stop talking about Lum. Your family's bunba shop is an icon of our city's heritage. It's your birthright. You're part of its legacy. You can't overlook that. Exasperated, but too agreeable to ignore her, Lum shrugged, saying, everyone helps out at the shop. Anyone could take over. It's kind of the same with your family, right, Win? No, Ha says, before I even open my mouth. My hands tighten around my chopsticks. If they had been made of weaker materials, they would have snapped at my fist. We have a responsibility to our families. There's a hierarchy that needs to be followed. Ba had said something similar when I returned home. She pulled me into the sitting room of the main house, setting me beneath the family altar. She had lit incense recently, and the smell of it still filled the room, making everything smoky. You have a responsibility, she said, and pressed a note into my hands. You are the matriarch of our family, our future Mohe. It's time for you to own up to it. If you don't take over as head of the family soon, our family will be exposed to the lonely, hungry spirits that still roam the earth. Without direction, we will be lost. Being Mauhe is an honorary role, I said, indignant. Besides, Ba, you said I could finish university first. Being Mauhe is a protective role, she said, without addressing my concern. If it weren't for all the Mauhe before you, where would you be? Anh quả nhớ kể trông cay con. There's a chain of command we have to listen to, Ha says. My gaze rises to the space above her head, so I don't have to look directly at her. There's a path we're meant to be on. It's our responsibility to fulfill the roles we're given. I stare at the darkness for so long that the shadows above Ha's head start to whirl. They gather into churning clouds at the end of the alley, behind unsuspecting patrons. Ha points her finger at me, half leaned over the table as she talks, but I don't hear anything she says. I blink, hard, rubbing the corner of my eyes to dispel the shapes that have started forming. Rats, I remind myself. The city is infested. The shadows continue to grow, no longer small flickers or glints of darkness in my peripheral. They grow and grow and grow, a stream of darkness flooding into the residential part of the alley, just behind the last few patrons. It's hard to see between the alley lights, but the shadow is there, becoming more apparent the more I stare.
Hello to all of you, my friends. I'm Kenzie Allen, and Wagajununi Jeet Weskwagedot. I'm so happy you've all made it here. I'm proud to have worked with Danielle Emerson, and Danielle, thank you for sharing your poems with me these past few months. How very thankful we should all be for your work. Yowanko. Storytelling is so inherent to Danielle's art, her deeply intimate observations of family life running as an electric river under the landscape of her work. Everything I do for them, she says, reminding us that every part of ourselves is part of the people who bring us into this world and who are alongside us on our journey. A strong sense of memory and connection carries this story in her work, and it's as though story feeds her, words twisting and bursting like blueberries in the throat, she writes. Through story, she nourishes us as well. There's a quiet lightning in the work of Danielle Emerson, music made from a baby's first laugh just as much as Loretta Lynn, a weaving of sovereignty, braiding matriarchy into a blanket that brings warmth and strength. The way our bodies hold the ashes and embers of those we carry with us. How our father's ashes settled on our bare shoulders, and I wouldn't be surprised if we're stained crimson, a silhouette of strawberry along our mother's sunburnt back. Images like that will stay with me always. Thank you, Danielle, and thank you all for all the work you share with us.
I am Danielle Shandiin Emerson, and I will be reading For the Common Sunflowers Along the Upper Fruitland, New Mexico Ditch. How do I write a poem about resilience? I want to talk more about the water, about streams and lakes, sun rays that never sit still. I imagine turquoise clusters matched with bright magenta Masonic scarves tied around our wrists, clasped cloth in our mouth. Wait, watch as wild flora and pollen twine along our skin like wild horse hairs. How do I write a poem about resilience? How many times will I be asked to write a poem, a song, a prayer, a sermon, a land acknowledgement, an obituary about resilience? Instead, I want to talk about the slender riverbanks, the farm ditches that Masana told Dolce cousins not to jump in because water dogs, imaginary beasts, might drag us under. I want to talk about childhood dirt banks, covered in wild sunflowers, taller than my 7th grade self, arcing like the res cats that come and go, always coming and going. Shema used to drive us down the old back roads. I'd slouch in my seat and stick my feet out the window, squealing like a toddler every time a sunflower touched my toes. In the rearview mirror, I watched their sturdy stems spring back up, arcing as if they held the sun. How many times will I be asked to write a poem about resilience? The wind spreads their seeds, their roots become clenched veins, tethering. I want to walk more in beauty, in memories and blossoms that kiss my skin, and I wonder if that dream counts as resilience. The next poem I'll be reading is April Showers, picking the stems of Chilkawehe. Shiyaje, my little one, what will you keep in the timber regions, July heat, Yaija so, orange bulbs, heavy-lidded, pressing my palms inward against my eyes. Goat head stacked my spine, tethering my body to desert sagebrush. My forearms lock like dry weeds, bunches of jade and olive surrounding the irrigation ditch, wax string strung around bundles of Chilkawehe, Navajo tea, collected in white plastic Walmart bags from Shimasana's wooden cabinet behind the raw-eaten pantry door, hanging like ghost bead bracelets. They raise arms to ward off bad dreams along my cousin's wrist, plucked from the side of the old highway where accidents seemed predetermined, colliding like cicada smears on stovetop pavement. She'e unsure, voila, turning over dry dirt in sheer hands, digging with oak twigs as Navajo tea grazes my knees and I step closer to the sky. Yoggle Duklij, a baby blue jean jacket, where specks of Shandiin sunshine fall like a binne morning dew on dew-loving skin. My cousin walks with her back tall, strong like Chilkawehe bluffs. I want to cry, to collapse from my right thumb inward until my skin is inside out. But she says, watch the stars climb again night after night. They look like your siblings' eyes, pools of fire-stoked light. When people ask, what will you keep? Wrap Chilkawehe on my hands, staining my fingers green. I'll keep their love, my cousin's strength, stems of Navajo brilliance refusing to bend as carves drive by, disturbing a budding Lejeuneful silence. And the next poem I'll read is Young Navajo Girl. In the land's large palm, in distance, the rough edges makes her look so much smaller. Mesa tables stacked like hands, fingers intertwined, wrinkled and callous. Hands that the girl has held before, hands that the girl has never seen before, hands growing yucca plants and yellow rocks from their fingernails. The reservation border, a string pulled taut, makes her chest hurt. A line she's forced to walk, palms out, knees locked. A young girl with the skin the shade of the land she calls home, dark hair the length of her ancestors' well wishes, tied up with white yarn behind her ears. Calluses knot her heels, at her feet sunlight licks her toes, dirt mats her shins, scraped and wet with sweat. Her grandmother's old coat rests on her shoulders like hardened clay. On her arms, bits of rock and ripped corn stalks peek between the girl's matted silhouette against upper fruitland bluffs. Her eyes are soft. If she smiled, they crinkled at the edges. If she'd frowned, they'd flatten and graze over. Crinkling when roadside vendors sell her steamed corn. Flattening when drunk fathers and uncles break their promises. A young girl whose name latches uncomfortably on white tongues. They tell her whisper, don't let your voice echo, because with her comes the voices and names of young girls back home. Young girls, Atel, old girls, Adzan, older women, Masane, each with words in their throat, twisting and bursting like blueberries, strung like the branches of juniper trees, grounded between teeth and the crisp morning air, cold and damp on their exposed tongues. Hands guide them, Ated, Adzan, Masane, across the string, gripping tight, rubbing coaxing shapes into their tired wrists. Listen closely to the wind and you can hear them, exhaling out and in, inhaling in and out, right before they jump. And the last poem I'll be reading is Shadejah Collects Seashells by the Seashore. Dark amethyst, speckled smooth, almost enough to press inward with both thumbs, gather broken husks held together by hopeful, wild hair. Milky orange, cool air, flip-flops, the cheap plastic kind, tracing sand between pale toes, creamy dots glide across tan sand. Shadejah wants to walk on water, climb the tide like peel mesa palm tops, blue rolling rocks mirroring a shiprock mid-July sky. Shadejah looks so small in the distance, almost like how I remember her as a child, a toddler, timid footsteps leave behind fresh panes of class. Shadejah is so much older now. I watch from the far end as she walks across the beach. Abalone, white shell woman rises, twirls, as I listen to the water. Shadejah enters a new phase of life, a white shell to fill, to discard and drop and pick up again and again, to keep walking, not running, never running. Shadejah walks until she becomes nothing more than a dot, and I can at last let her go, knowing she'll be all right. Shadejah will search and wander until she is brought to the ocean floor, changing bodies submerged by ivory froth, piles of shells at my feet, all different sizes. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, my name is Nafkote Tamirat, and I have the immense honor to introduce my fellowship mentee, the writer Tesfaye. Before I got to meet Selimon, I was compelled by how he described himself as someone who writes into and occupies the space of what he calls the in-between. To quote Selimon, I've lived in the in-between for so long that I've become something of a bridge between countries, between faiths, between grief and joy, between worlds people often refuse to see. My hope is that this work lets others cross over too, that it slows the stone mid-skip across the water so we no longer glide past refugee stories without stopping to feel them. That purpose-driven generosity and vision blaze through Selimon's novel in progress, In Between Worlds. Here we meet Hannah, an immigration lawyer whose latest client comes from the city in Yemen, near which she and her family lived in a refugee camp when she was a child. Through this interaction, Hannah must contend with her own overwhelming memories, including the central betrayal that has shaped her and her family's current existence. How do we embrace the beauty and lyricism of language while preserving clarity? When does poetry obscure the realities whose harsh faces we don't wish to blunt? I don't know if there's one answer for these questions, but I do know that Selimon manages this conundrum with a seeming effortlessness that belies the craft he has poured into his work to achieve it. There are moments in his novel that read like prose poems, and yet we never lose sight of the colossal conflicts and choices that Hannah and her community must somehow navigate without losing each other and their senses of self. The in-between in Selimon's rendering is not a space of doom and misery, far from it. The people who live here are hilarious at times, obnoxious at others. Often they must demand what they deserve, insist upon justice, because the powers who dictate such fundamentals as their living spaces and conditions of liberation continually prove they will not take up their causes. The scales of nations can become so massive that the human-sized is forgotten. Selimon's novel shows us, however, that this amnesia is not universal, that those who make art can issue a reckoning, an archive that instead of counting only those who have been lost, reminds us of who remains. As Selimon notes, I want this work and my writing to be a beacon of light in that larger constellation of what it means to have a home, a shelter, for others who also live in that in-between. In reading Selimon's writing, I have received illumination from this beacon, and I can't wait for all of us, to be able to read this book in its entirety.
Hi, my name is Solomon Tesfaye, and I'm going to be reading an excerpt from my novel titled In Between Worlds. Hannah's only desire had been to leave the camp, to be free, to go down the winding paths of the mountain where the camp stood, enclosed behind barbed wire and brick walls on top of a mountain, and visit the city below. She was only 6, but in her mind, she was old enough to roam the world beyond the camp's gate. She tried before and failed, but she has a better plan now. There, it was always there, and there it was, like a lighthouse standing tall on the shore, the city made of marble and cement with banks, factories, and a school with kids her age. Not like the camp, which was the sort of place that our uncle said could be taken down and evacuated in a matter of minutes. A monument to the struggle of displacement, with its flapping tents whirring with dust and rows of cots and sagging mattresses embracing weary bodies. A place where curious buds poked their heads through the topsoil into the suspicious heat, only to be rebuked at night by sudden frosts. Her uncle's stories from their visits to the markets made the lore of the city even greater. And when they told these stories, they handled them as one would a child. They teased it, they punished it, they threw it high up in the air, they wrestled it to the ground and let it go again. They told stories of a blind man with a cheetah on a leash and girls dancing barefoot, moving their arms, half hidden by their veils and half revealed. Stories that praised the flesh of camel meat cooked over fires of seasoned cherry wood and sprinkled with sweet oil. Stories of old men with the odor of elephants after the rain, and no story was repeated. Each tale came with a new discovery about the city, which, unlike the camp, where the inhabitants repeated the same scenes, the same speeches, greeted by mouths open in identical yawns and lives lived in concentric circles. The camp, where behind the fragile facade of greenery lived oppressive people who could gather at a moment's notice. But Hannah wasn't allowed to visit the city below on account of her being 6 years old. And she wasn't allowed to go with her parents or uncles either on account of them being paranoid. On her daily walks with her mother, past the resentful old tents tinged brown with envy, past the ration shops that sold rice, and past the clothes and tattered flags that hung in bunches from the roof, and past the mustard streaks of poop near the bushes, she saw the harbor where the docks were high over black water that slammed against the retaining walls, where the stone steps were made slippery by seaweed, and the sight of someone sliding and falling always made her laugh. From their vantage point above the city, she could make out people's diminished forms, women wearing shawls and men wearing turbans over their heads, climbing up boats and vessels, saying their farewells as the ships carried their wishes on board. Those remaining behind said that for some, their wishes would return to them with the time. For others, they would just sail forever. And each day they saw ships coming and going, but never saw the same ship come back, as if the city below only knew departures. Our returns. Just like the camp, where no one ever returned once they left. And each day Hannah turned her eyes away in resignation, her own wishes mocked by the wind and the sight of children going on an endless adventure beyond the horizon. Outside her parents' tent, Uncle Ibrahim and Uncle Asafau bickered as they traded opinions with our father on the latest political events in Ethiopia. Stuff they heard on the radio, at the cafe, their only tangible connection to life back home. Meanwhile, Hannah sat on a crate inside the tent, drawing the shapes and symbols of Arabic letters her father was teaching her with a branch. Bored out of her mind and looking for her next adventure. They call themselves the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front. But there is nothing democratic about them, Uncle Ibrahim grieved. Also, the title is just too long. That's how you know the new government is a mess. They can't even get the name right. Uncle Ibrahim had a habit of carefully inspecting his palms and biting his nails while talking about politics, and Hannah saw him doing that now through the slant opening of the tent. It had been a week since Hannah's last adventure when she tried to ride a donkey up the mountain by herself. And before that, she'd stolen tangerines from Khalid's food stand because to get food here, residents had to join a long queue. And the more crowded the camp got, the less food there was to go around. It was especially unbearable in the summer months. So many bodies, so close to one another. Food was a rare treat, too expensive a luxury. Fed up with always being the one asking for things they couldn't afford, Hannah had resorted to stealing from Khalid's stand. She didn't feel bad about it. Khalid was what her Uncle Ibrahim would call an asshole, as she thought. He was notorious for his high prices and disdainful attitude towards his customers, exploiting their reluctance to travel to town for cheaper goods. His character matched his appearance. Buck teeth, a crooked smile, with loose flesh that stretched willingly off his bones like chewing gum. Khalid also harbored a dislike for the Habesha people in the camp, despite his own mixed Ethiopian and Yemeni heritage. A part of his identity he seemed to deny as vehemently as his own integrity. So no, Hannah didn't feel guilty stealing from him, and she got away with it easily, too easily for it to really count as an adventure in her mind. The real adventure was in the city below.
Hello, I'm Tajja Isen, and for the past several months, it has been my pleasure to mentor Elisabeth Vasquez Hein. When I was first invited to be a mentor for this program, I asked to see a sample of work from the writer I might be paired with. I wanted to make sure that I would have something to offer that person. Elisabeth kindly agreed, and I received an excerpt from her memoir that braids her parents' epistolary courtship between the Pacific Northwest and the Philippines, with Elisabeth's own childhood memories reflecting on her relationship with her mother. I could tell immediately that this was someone I wanted to share ideas with, someone I wanted to talk to about form and memoir and memory and selfhood. Indeed, our conversations have been very fruitful. Every time I talk with Elisabeth or read her work, not only do I leave with a deeper understanding of her project, but also personally reinvigorated about the possibilities of nonfiction. That first excerpt I read, and Elisabeth's work more broadly, balances immersive emotional texture with strong scene work and a beautiful, pulsing sense of her thematic questions. It's a clarity of vision that came through even more strongly during our first meeting and all our meetings since. Elisabeth's memoir in progress explores diaspora, ritual, and grief, a childhood and adulthood lived in different countries and continents, and how we come to know our families and ourselves in writing. I have tremendous admiration for her dedication to finding the right shape to tell her story, her sense of adventure when it comes to formal experimentation, and the keen emotional truths of her work. It's been such a pleasure to work with her, and I'm excited for you, who now gets to hear her read.
I'm Elisabeth Vasquez Hein, and I'll be reading an excerpt from my memoir in progress. This piece is called According to. I'm 24 the first time I marry, the same age as my mother when she married my father. My wedding is not in a Catholic church, but in a non-denominational chapel on an historic military fort turned state park surrounded by coastal forest on a wet and windy September day. The chapel, a simple rectangle with a hardwood floor, is a blank slate to place my hopes on for a long and happy union. Though my mother is disappointed the wedding isn't being consecrated by the Catholic Church, she approves of the tall, handsome, university-educated, and employed groom 7 years my elder. On my wedding day, I already know I no longer love him. I know I was too young when we got together 5 years ago, and I've since grown into my own person, more restless for the world. On my wedding day, I go through motions propelled by a ritual stronger than my own desires. My vows are an off-sounding poem pronouncing love to no one in particular. Within a few years, my marriage will crumble, brought down by adulterous hijinks and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling, according to the marriage therapist Dr. John Gottman. According to my mother, my marriage failed because 1, we didn't marry in a Catholic church, 2, my husband wasn't Catholic, and 3, I married in the same year as my sister. Bad luck according to Philippine superstition. After the divorce, I embark on a decade of soul-searching and unintentionally spiritual tourism. When traveling, I orient myself by the cathedrals on the map. I go to them like watering holes to cleanse my conscience and forgive myself for failing at the sacrament of marriage. I don't admit to my mother how much I enjoy a sacred space, how I prefer to seek the refuge of an empty church on my own time. I may light a candle and kneel, moving my lips silently to recite a prayer, the way I would see my mother's father do when he read to himself in English, slow to grasp the meaning. I may sit, choosing an inconspicuous pew near the back, like my mother would choose. I may contemplate the suspended crucifix where drops of blood run down Jesus' forehead, wrists, and knees, or in other versions, he is without wounds, miraculous and resurrected. If the church has a gift shop, I may purchase a rosary for my mother, a souvenir to acknowledge her divine. There's a cord tying me to churches that was woven by repeated actions performed in my younger life. But even if my mother had not insisted on me following the sacramental straight and narrow, a certain devotion would probably still run in my blood. My mother's mother was devout. She sang weekly in the choir and was the president of the St. Anthony Association. She put all her eggs in St. Anthony's basket from the time she wished to have a boy after first birthing 4 girls. My mother's grandmother gathered the children twice daily at sunrise and sunset to pray the Lord's Prayer with her. While I don't subscribe to the rigor and discipline of my maternal lineage's versions of Catholicism, I'm still drawn to the musty air of ancient churches where I can find a softened version of myself. I heard a Filipino psychologist say on her weekly podcast, Pinoy Love Language, that before we were colonized, our people listened. We attuned to nature and the elements. When the Spaniards came, they tried to weed out our practices, our reverence for the moon and stars. But weeds grow back. The psychologist went on to say when a Filipino immigrates, they will expect to practice their religion in their new country. They will crave a connection to their spiritual source. They will seek out the local Catholic Church. But I want to know more about the times before my ancestors crossed the bridge from animism to Catholicism. They once knew nothing about Christ or the Virgin Mary. Deities were birds or wind or river. Sacraments were rituals to commune with the unseen. In the cosmology of the island people before 1521, everything had a spirit. Then, one day, artful figures of godly humans materialized. These figures of Catholic saints were placed in newly raised churches and homes, light and airy structures built to accommodate the tropical heat, appearing like gigantic bird cages at night. In a book entitled Philippine Religious Imagery, I learned how these santos were first brought by the Spanish, some made by the colonized in Mexico, and delivered via the Manila galleon trade route. Eventually, the local island people would learn to make santos out of softwood, hardwood, bone, and imported ivory with methods prescribed by the Spanish. Knives carved bodies and faces to grant miracles. Brushes painted a typical Philippine color scheme onto the wood. At Mass, I used to follow my mother up the aisle to take the Blessed Host upon my tongue. She taught me to cast my eyes downward and respond to the priest's body of Christ with a whispered amen. We shuffled down the aisle, hands before our groins, then back to the pew to kneel. The saints stood mounted in altars high on the wall surrounding the nave. Arms outstretched, they handed out blessings, they protected us, they looked over us. We mouthed prayers rote-like while organ music droned. To me, it was a gamble which prayer would get answered. Would I be guided to stay on the correct path? Would I one day be deserving of a faithful marriage? I looked around at other moving mouths and wondered if God and the saints read lips. Did my propensity for silent supplication come from an ingrained need to remain unnoticed? How much did the imposed religion of colonizers shape the way my ancestors had prayed? Maybe we learned to whisper prayer not out of reverence, but out of fear of pronouncing our true convictions aloud.
Hello, I'm Chinelo Okparanta, author of Happiness Like Water, Under the Udala Trees, and Harry Sylvester Bird. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you my incredibly talented mentee, Ava Pauline Emilione. Ava has been a writer since they were a very young child, writing poems at the age of 6 or 7, keeping journals since kindergarten. A graduate of NYU and a former finance analyst at a private equity firm, Ava's complicated upbringing, their identity as a Black, biracial, and queer individual in suburban America, as well as their understanding of America as, and I quote, a terrifying and beautiful creature, a land littered with the blood of my enslaved ancestors, discarded needles, and intergenerational dreams distorted beyond recognition, a wasteland that is also home, end quote, have influenced their writing greatly. As Ava says, and I quote again, It is this America with its hypocrisy and deep-rooted trauma and sick perversions that my short story collection will explore. End quote. I have been blown away by Ava's heart, by their desire to write from that very heart the stories that matter to them, regardless of whether the stories are anything that people will want to publish or read. Ava's writing is writing that is not afraid to examine the historical and contemporary social paradoxes of life in America. Ava's is honest writing. Ava's is brave writing, the sort of writing that true art is made of.
Hello, my name is Ava Pauline Emilione, and I will be reading an excerpt from my debut fiction novel, King River, about a drag performer facing environmental collapse. Thank you. With wide-set, shiny black eyes and a nose found only on ancient Roman coinage, my girlfriend could make one feel small, stupid, and clumsy. Lynn had always been that striking, even back when we met at 15 through our school's production of Les Miserables. Lynn played a stunning Eponine. I was a pitiful, scorned Fantine. I resented my role, but stuck around to hang out with Lynn, who applied lotion to my hands in the brutal winters and folded origami swans for me during theater practice. On the closing night of Les Mis, Lynn drove us to Bowl River, where overgrown grass and smooth rocks straddled deep green-gray water. We stripped to nothing and waded into the river, which glowed under the white light of the moon. Imagine if we drowned and the cops found our bodies at the bottom of the river, Lynn said. She laughed at the bright stars, her arms wrapped tight around me. Every cell in my body ached to kiss her, but I did not dare. I bet they find bodies here all the time. They wouldn't even be surprised, she said. It doesn't matter how many bodies they've seen, I said. They've never seen ones like ours. My 16th birthday was months away, and already I knew I was different. The feminine curves my mother swore my husband would love someday felt like a curse, alien and cruel. After that night, Lynn and I began to share everything that could pass between two people. Secrets, underwear, the spit between our teeth. Mostly we talked about how badly we wanted out of Bowl Valley, our hometown in southern Colorado where addiction or menial labor sucked the soul out of everyone's stares. The day Lynn got accepted into college in Denver, I packed my bags. On the night before we left, I had a nightmare that Bowl Valley burned to the ground. When I told Lynn about the dream, my chest erupting with fear, she only shrugged. So what if it burns, she said in the dark. What has this place ever done for you? I thought of Susie, my drag mother, and the soft music of the river, but did not contradict Lynn. She was my only ticket to freedom. When I told my mother I was leaving for Denver, she demanded I sit at our floral, plastic-covered sofa so she could pray over me. Please, Lord, cleanse my daughter of the evil of her flesh, she cried out to heaven, but her prayers were no use. On the day I picked up the last of my clothes from my mother's house, she held my face in her calloused hands. The river is not done with you, my daughter. One day, it will call you back. 9 years after the couch exorcism, my mother's prophecy came true. I drove 8 hours from Denver towards Bowl Valley, Colorado. What home, what hell, where all the other buildings cower under the mountains. Gas stations with signs advertising beer and lottery tickets, a decrepit post office, the rugged cowgirl boutique selling magnets that read, I survived Bowl Valley. On the peak of the nearest southwest mountain lay BioAmerica, the nation's leading manufacturer of medical cleaning supplies. Years later, when the email chains and security footage were finally released to the public, I learned that on the night I drove to Bowl Valley, BioAmerica had transformed Bowl River, once the ultimate giver of life, into a tomb. The next night, Susie and I nursed beers beside Bowl River's poisoned current. Chinelo, her aging bitch of a Bichon, barked and barked and barked on the shaded patch of grass beneath her. Susie took a bottle and pried it open with her teeth. I sensed that she was building up the courage to say something, which made my shoulders tighten. Doctor called, Susie said. They found something in my scan. It could be nothing, I said, my stomach churning. Doctors find shit all the time. Susie shook her head, setting the beer between her thighs like she had all the time in the world. Susie had always joked that she'd be the oldest living drag queen in America, but no one in Bull Valley broke records like that. They already told me what it was, Susie said, but they didn't need to. When you're sick, like they're saying I'm sick, you know. And I know. Chanel whimpered, laying her chin in the grass. I pulled my knees to my chest, a horrible pressure built behind my eyes. My tears felt heavy as they slipped down my cheeks. I could not afford to lose another mother. Susie heard me sniffling and knelt down to whack my arm. Don't cry about it, honey. I know I look like a goddess, but I'm just a person, she said. And people get sick all the time. I grabbed her arm to pull my face to her lap. My tears soaked her thin leggings as she wept into my hair. We're some old-ass queens, I said. Her laughter broke up her tears. I was just like you when I was your age, she said. Drinking and dancing, trying to get out of Bull Valley. When she was young, Susie had dreamed of being a Vegas showgirl. She graduated high school, packed a pair of new tights and peacock feathers in her sedan, and drove straight to Las Vegas. Susie passed so well that casino managers never considered her to be anything other than a woman born. She got a job on the spot, but there was no river in Las Vegas. No place to swim or dunk her poreless face beneath the current. No minnows nibbling soft and quick at her painted toes. After 6 months dancing for gamblers, her peacock feathers followed her back to Little Bull Valley. I felt like I needed to stay near the river. Maybe I thought it would shield me from those drunk, evil men I was dancing for, she said. But I got it wrong. The whole time, the river was calling me back, me, she said, pointing to herself, to be its protector. And I failed. You didn't fail, I said. You totally protected me as a kid. You protect so many people. My use of the present tense lingered in the air like a threat. How much time would pass until Susie's long legs and quick wit slipped entirely into the past? I should have done something bigger, like a protest or a show or a drag visual, she said. For the river. Let these motherfuckers know that we are not going down without a fight. She looked like her old self again, with glowing brown skin and eyes so dark that they reflected all the light in the room. She asked me if I would be the headline performer. I'd love to, I said, and a brilliant smile broke across her face. Invite Lynn too, she said. Show her what she's missing.
Thank you to our fellows for fantastic readings this evening. And thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. The 2026 Emerging Voices Fellowship application period will open on January 1st. You can subscribe to PEN America's newsletter or follow us on social media for updates and more information about the next application period. Until then, have a wonderful evening, and thank you again for joining us.